Everybody, I'd like to welcome members of the board and members of the public and staff to our meeting of May 25th of the Historic Resources Board. Would the staff please call a roll?
Chair Bernstein.
Here.
Whoops, that's an old one. Vice Chair Bauer.
Here.
Board Member Wimmer.
Here.
Board Member Corey.
Here.
Board Member Bunnenberg.
Here.
Board Member Kohler.
Here.
Board Member McKinnon.
Here.
Council Member Holman. All present.
Okay, thank you so much. First on our agenda is oral communications. The public may speak to any item not on the agenda. 3 minutes per speaker. If there are any members of the public like to speak to us, I see none. Next is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. I would like to make a suggestion to the board that based on our heavy schedule today with members of the public and applicants present, if we move the agenda item of Mills Act to the last after the public hearing of Action 5, would that be acceptable to the board? Yeah. Okay, so we'll move the Mills Act item, which is agenda item number 4. That'll be after agenda item 5. Okay, great, thanks. Any other agenda changes, additions, or deletions? Okay, I see none. Okay, let's move. Next on our agenda is city official reports, Historic Resources Board meeting schedule assignments. I don't believe we have any. That brings us to agenda item number 2, study session. I'll read the description, then we'll ask staff to give us comments or a report on that. Study session, item number 2, 250 and 350 Sherman Avenue. HRB study session supporting preliminary architectural review of a new approximately 40,351 square feet public safety building at 250 Sherman Avenue and a new parking structure at 350 Sherman Avenue to contain 636 parking spaces on 6 levels to or below grade, with a footprint of 37,075 square feet and floor area of 149,500 square feet. The public safety building site would be developed with 3 individual buildings and provide 167 parking spaces for use by the Palo Alto Police Department, 911 Emergency Dispatch Center, Emergency Operations Center, Office of Emergency Services, and Fire Department. Environmental assessment, environmental impact report is being prepared. Formal project application not yet submitted. Zone District PF Public Facilities. For more information, there's a contact that the public can take a look at. That's a description. Would staff have a report or comments on this before we start? Thanks. Oh, yes. Excuse me for a second. Yes, Chair Bauer.
I need to disclose that this is public record, but I'll do it here again. I was on the 2011 Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission. I participated in the Public Safety Subcommittee that looked at the need for a new public safety building, and I have spoken out at council meetings in favor of this, so I just want to get that on the record.
Okay, thank you. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. I want to, before I begin, first introduce our newest staff member to my left, Emily Vance. She's our new Historic Preservation Planner at long last, and I'm happy to have her here. So just by introduction, I do have on my right Matt Raschke. He's the project lead for this project, the public safety building and parking garage in the California Avenue Business District, the address on Sherman. We have kind of an interesting situation in that our code, our municipal code, does not require Historic Resources Board review of projects on this site because there are no historic resource designated historic resources on these 2 sites. There is, however, a historic resource adjacent to the parking garage site. That's the 350 Sherman site. It is the old Antonio's Nut House, which was originally a Safeway store before it became converted to different use. So it's interesting in that we have an environmental impact report that will be prepared, and there's a cultural resources section of that report. And so I had made note that there was such a resource adjacent, and so that the cultural resources section of the EIR should address that and make mention of it. And then the opportunity for the study session is here. Likely this project will not be coming back to the HRB, but it is a city project, and being that it's a city project, having the HRB's input is helpful at this stage, where we have 3 options that are being considered by the applicant team. They have a presentation, so without further ado, I'll let them present.
Thank you, Amy. I'd like to introduce Mallory Kusenberry from Rostralis Kusenberry Architecture to present the project. Mallory.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. We are at the very early stages of this project. It's early schematic design and data gathering, and we are in the process of due diligence, program verification, and preliminary design. It is a very early phase for us, so the idea is we're trying to do outreach and get as much input and generate as much conversation to inform the early development of this project. So the timeliness for this meeting is excellent for us to get further input on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cruise through this at a very high level, just to kind of hit the high points. Please slow me down or stop me if there's something you want me to elaborate on. And then obviously I can elaborate at the end with the additional questions. As was mentioned, this is 2 projects. I don't know if you can see my cursor there. It is 2 buildings. This is the public safety building on the upper. I'm on the upper image. This is the public safety building on your right, and the parking structure on the left on 2 separate parcels. The public safety building is 3 stories above grade, 2 stories of parking below grade, 47,000 square foot police station, fire administration, EOC, and 911 center. The parking structure is around 637, 640 stalls, 3 stories above grade, 2 stories below grade, with an opportunity for photovoltaic panels over the entire top floor above the 3rd level of the parking structure. These lots officially are lots C6 and C7. C6 is the public safety building lot. C7 is the parking structure. The bounding streets are Park Boulevard, Birch through the middle, and Ash, and then Sherman is the primary frontage, and Jacaranda is the divider. Jacaranda Alley is the divider. It's a one-way alley, just to remind you, half block off of California Avenue. Just for reference, we all agreed upon Project North is up on this drawing. The 2 existing lots are empty. They're parking lots, empty of trees in the middle, but have a perimeter of trees around them. Jacaranda Lane goes back here, and it's all surface parking. It's unusual surface parking that you actually have to leave the parking lot to go to another drive aisle. You actually use the city streets as part of your circulation. Photographs of the lots. They look relatively tree covered because they have the perimeter of trees, but they are bereft of trees in the middle. And then you can see some of the local buildings there, the courthouse that's across the street, mixed use residential, and the new Visa building over on the right. On the bottom here, you have some comparative heights. This is the courthouse. This is a mixed use residential. This is office retail, and then this is retail. And you can see this is the height of the parking structure with photovoltaics above it, and this is the conceptual height for the public safety building. Now, some data briefly on the 2 sites. On the right is the public safety site. Just as a way of introduction for public safety buildings, it's an essential facility. It also has some high order of security requirements. So the distances, the setbacks that you see are driven by security setbacks. So we try to prevent vehicles from getting too close to the building. So there's a 25-foot minimum security setback on all sides. Thus the setbacks. The primary footprint is here for the public safety building, 3 stories above grade. Then there's a couple of 1-story site buildings here. This is a screened operational area here, so you're not going to see it. It'll be walled. There will be police vehicles and operations inside that. But then the main feature from a public standpoint is on Birch, we're providing a very deep setback public plaza that we hope to have programmed with activities, particularly around lunchtime, areas for people to eat, and shady areas to sit, as well as operating using some of the setback areas along Sherman for seating as well. Then the public safety building, which is a little cut off on this slide. I don't know if it's cut off on the one that you're looking at, but the primary pedestrian entrance is off Birch. Primary vehicular entrance is off Sherman. The parcel pretty much, it pretty much goes property line to property line with the exception of about a 10-foot, 11-foot setback on Birch. Antonio's Nut House is right here. And the parking lot in front of them is right there. These are some street sections. This is a cross section through Birch. You can see the 3 stories above grade for the parking, and then the row of photovoltaics. The height, to get into a little data, it's 36 feet 8 inches to the top of the guardrail, and then maybe up to around 45, 46 feet high once you get to the top of the photovoltaics, should they be installed. You can see the deep setback here on the public safety building of the public plaza. And then this is Park. This is Sherman Avenue. So you can see the courthouse across the street and the public. I'm sorry, this is Sherman, and this is the parking structure, and then the courthouse and the public safety building there. And again, these are all subterranean. This area here are the subterranean components. Since we're early on in the phase, you're going to see some refined drawings, but the designs are not refined. These are just illustrations to get conversations started. You can see the deep setback area, where there's a lot of plaza opportunity here, and Antonio's Nut House is in this location. The parking structure is here. You see a generous perimeter landscaping of street trees, where we can get a double row of trees. We do, and then a lot of shade and landscape opportunities on the public plaza here. There's a heavy emphasis on pedestrian movement, so we understand the movement of pedestrians for lunchtime along Park, along Birch, and along Ash, and we're trying to make accommodations with shade and generous sidewalks in those areas. And assuming a little more passive use on Sherman, because the circulation is primarily in what we're calling north-south direction. Now, we are also sensitive to the scale of the garage, particularly as it approaches the Antonio's Nut House corner. So Antonio's Nut House, again, reminder is right here. This is Birch on your right. These are 2 versions of the same plan. We're trying to make street level adjustments to the parking structure so to improve the pedestrian environment. So you can see we were directed to optimize the quantity of parking. So we're trying to get as much parking as possible. That's why it's filling the property line. However, one consideration, we do have an arcade on the Ash Street, which we have retained. So there's an walk under arcade on Ash. On the Birch Street side, relative to this project that we're discussing, the one opportunity we're looking at is providing an exterior staircase. So the one on the right is the alternate option, an exterior civic staircase that goes up the side of the garage, allowing you to actually walk up and exit the stair at different points in the garage, creating more of a civic opportunity for seeing people going up and down. People then can exit or enter on the California Avenue side and walk that direction. And then there would be an opportunity for public art along that wall too. So the idea is, with what space we have available, trying to make it a little bit more pedestrian amenable. Now, in terms of the concepts, I want to say that maybe concepts is even a misnomer. We have 3 attitudes, 3 approaches that we're referring to them as conversation starters. And the idea is we want to create kind of 3 prototypes of how this project might face the city, get input, and from there we would then actually develop design concepts. So the idea is to kind of gather all of the ideas together into one approach and give it an identity and then get feedback on it. So the first approach we're calling screening greening, and it's an approach that's based on the idea of downplaying the presence of the building by using organic and informal approaches. So for instance, we might have more organic materials like wood or wood-like materials, rougher textures, stone-like textures, maybe on the parking structure, potentially vines actually on the building, dense screening using landscaping. Again, the idea being to kind of take the screening that we're going to need to do from a security standpoint for the public safety building, where you don't want a lot of vulnerable windows, screening those windows, but doing it in a way to actually help downplay the presence of the building. These are massing models. No windows are shown. They're just massing models, again, very conceptual. But it gives you an idea of, for instance, this is the entrance to the parking structure, the public safety building here. Sample materials are on the right. And in all cases, in all concepts, you're going to see the goal is to make the parking structure and the public safety building work in tandem. So they're sending a singular message, more of a civic presence in a way somewhat of a gateway towards Cal Avenue. But again, this one using more organic materials and a more presence of organic screening. So that would be concept number 1. The landscape design would then follow. You see more organic materials, more informal development of the site components. The second concept is what we're calling dynamic massing. This is a different attitude. The first attitude was downplaying the presence of the building, softening it with organic approach. The second approach is about having a more assertive building, a little more dynamic massing, allowing the building to assert itself and be a little bit more interesting visually. The color scheme is based on the traditional Palo Alto buildings of like terracotta, white plaster, color scheme, but done in a more contemporary way. And then the volumes of the building become more, like I said, dynamic. And again, in the massing model, you see it here. The building has a stronger presence. Again, the garage and the public safety building are working in tandem. The garage has a large public art opportunity then on Sherman facing the Visa building here on this blank wall. And as with the previous scheme, the site development would build upon that building idea. So you can see the plaza components would be more blocky elements, more rectilinear elements in concert with the massing of the building. And then the third idea is, all right, so you have kind of the downplay of the building, then a more assertive building. The third one we would call a little more serious, and we call it simple civic. And this idea is to take the building and have a look that is a little more serious, a little more formal in its presence, still contemporary, but it uses more vertical windows, a little more traditional proportion, and it deep sets the windows on the ground floor, evoking an arcade, uses more traditional materials like brick, and even though it would probably be precast, we would try to simulate the idea of French limestone, which is traditional civic material throughout the Bay Area. The massing model here, again, parking structure down here on the left, and the public safety building here on the right. And similarly, slightly more formal, a little more serious landscape approach on the site development. So that's the big picture.
Mallory, thank you so much. I'd like to next ask the board if there are any questions at this point for Mallory or staff. Any kind of questions before we, and then we'll open up to the members of the public before we make our comments about it. But just if there are any questions. Board Member Wimmer.
Yes, so I just wanted to clarify the intent of the public safety building is to remove the police dispatch element from this building, which is down in the basement, over to that location. And is that also where the actual police officers are dispatched? Is that where they will be housed in this building and until there's an emergency call, and then they'll be dispatched from this location?
Absolutely correct. It is a full replacement of the police station that's right next door. So all police operations, police administration, command and control, patrol, various departments, investigations would all move over, as would fire administration, the Office of Emergency Services, which is down here with the EOC that's here, and the dispatch function as well. And so I'm clicking back to the site plan. There we go. So yes, so there are two levels of parking below the public safety building. One level would be entirely for patrol vehicles, and the second level would be for staff vehicles. And vehicles would be dispatched from here, and I failed to mention, so I'm really glad you brought this up. There are two ramps into the subterranean parking. With any public safety building, just to clarify, you cannot have just one ramp into the parking garage, because should one ramp become disabled, patrol vehicles need to be able to leave through a second. So we have two sets of ramps. A two-way ramp that enters and exits from Birch. The role of that ramp is primarily, during day-to-day operations, primarily for personal vehicles. So when you arrive at work and you leave from work, you use that ramp. It goes down to the lower level, B2, for personal vehicles. It's the backup ramp for patrol. Largely patrol vehicles would not be entering and exiting from that on a day-to-day basis. The second ramp is on Sherman, two-way ramp right here. That would primarily be the ramp for patrol vehicles entering and exiting the site.
So I'm just wondering what the impact on that whole neighborhood, that sort of sub-community is, just because of that location, because you have a barrier of the train tracks behind Park. And then you have to travel down several blocks even to get to El Camino, so that's going to be a main emergency thoroughfare that's not very wide. I mean, I don't know where, like if there's an emergency here at this building and you dispatch from that building, like the route of travel, it seems.
Hi, Matt Roschke, Public Works. Primarily, patrol is actually out in the field when the shift starts. The patrol vehicles are dispersed throughout the city, so the majority of patrol is already out on the streets. So occasionally when there's a specific emergency and some additional officers can be dispatched from this location, that may occur, but it's not the majority of time when.
Okay, that's actually a
Unlike how it's represented on television, where cars go careening out of the garage every time there's a call. It doesn't-
I was like,
they're
worried
already
about
out in
the
the field.
impact.
Yeah, they're already on the field. It's only in rare occurrences where they actually have to respond from the building.
And then my second question is, would you phase this project? Like, obviously, would you build the parking structure first?
Yes.
And then you'd build the buildings? Okay,
Absolutely. So the parking structure needs to replace the displaced parking before we can start construction on the public safety building. So yes. So after we get to a certain point of design approval, which is going towards later this year, the idea would then be to fast track the parking structure to get it going, and then the public safety building would lag at that point.
Roger.
Yes, hi. Was there any consideration for an alternative exterior for this main building besides another modern box? Did you consider community center style, traditional tile roofed home building that blends in more with the background of Palo Alto? I mean, I do a lot of homes for new people, over 300 or more in Palo Alto. 10 maybe are modern. So I don't quite see the need for this to be, and of course without seeing the windows on the walls and everything, it's hard to really know, but it just may end up just being another series of boxes that no one understands why they're there. And especially in a historic district like this is, in a sense. Maybe it's cost, I don't know, but I just have an opportunity here. Like even the old police department building is really quite elegant in a way. So as a person who likes historic homes, it's just that you have a chance here to really do something special, and then it's just going to be another multi-box that people will drive by, and once they've seen it, there's nothing else to look at. So just curious if this was a mandate from the city that it'd be a modern building.
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. And what I'll try to do is I'll break it into separate pieces to answer. The first is the box proportion, the shape that you're referring to. We did early studies on the massing. So we did a 2-story massing, which is more spread out. And this I would call a more compact vertical massing. That was driven, the final decision on that was driven by operations, because what was happening, it's a whole city block. So what was happening when it spread out and became more broken and down and lower level, the police department was walking long distances just to get to between functions that they, the police, when it was spread out, the police department was having to would have to walk long distances for functions that they do every day. So the vertical orientation of the massing, 3 stories and compact, was the best operationally because it put all the different departments that need to interact with each other very proximate. So that's how we got the massing. From a stylistic standpoint, there has been no directive on style, and I would say there's been no decision on style. What we're doing is, as I mentioned, presenting conversation starters. At the very least, the goal would be to evoke and where feasible, utilize the materials that are precedents from civic materials in Palo Alto. So your idea, your concept, or your idea of the resonance with the local tradition is completely consistent, and we would not go against that. Whether it's contemporary or otherwise, that has not been decided, and we're going to, as we get an attitude, like I said, a kind of a general consensus on an approach, then we will do stylistic and design options on those. And then the final point is the materials. There are a few constraints that we have doing public safety, which play a factor. One of them is the building needs to be ballistically resistant. So we are going to be steering towards materials like precast concrete by virtue of the fact that it's going to provide a ballistic protection that you need to have on a public safety building. It has to be survivable after a major disaster. So we cannot have a lot of extraneous elements on the building that could cause damage to individuals in the area, such as you mentioned Spanish tile. There's a big risk in an earthquake that some of those will come flying off. You can't have that happen on a public safety building, so we need to be very cognizant of how durable the building is. So that'll play a factor as well, but it hasn't closed any doors yet. All those doors are open.
Board Vice Chair Bauer.
Can you talk about the facade of the parking garage that faces the California Avenue buildings? Because that's, our review here is how the parking garage, primarily the parking garage, interfaces or interacts with that one property in the corner, Antonio's Nut House, which is on our historic register. So I see and like the foliage on your concept one, which will soften a large box, which is what a parking structure has to be. But I'm wondering what goes on the other side.
Thank you. Excellent question. I've put up the two zoomed in options that we're looking at in that corner. In terms of what our ambition is to make that corner, as it's adjacent to Antonio's Nut House, as visibly porous and inviting for pedestrians as possible. That's where the vertical circulation of the elevator is. That's where the stairs will land. And that was the incentive for having if we do the alternate option of having a staircase kind of splay toward California Avenue on that side. So from a qualitative standpoint, the idea is to have it feel like less box-like, more like a destination, and more with some interesting things visually. In terms of the actual design of it, we've not made any progress on that. It's just conceptual, as you saw from the previous ones, and I know the models didn't really show that side. But it would be designed to meet that ambition. So we'd like to show the staircase one way or another, have it be visually porous so that you can actually, so the box breaks down along that corner.
Yeah. I think your concept is great. And the public safety building, which has a number of security issues, all those security issues help to really reduce the impact on the neighborhood. But it's the parking structure. I mean, if you were, for instance, to adopt the first scheme and put the same foliage on the Jacaranda Avenue side, or I don't know what that is, Avenue or. Then that would soften that building. It's going to be fairly present.
It's going to be present, yeah.
Is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So I'm just encouraging you to think of that side, because that's really the interface. On the other side that we're seeing here, there's a brand new 2.5, 3-story building. So I think
yeah, and I would actually elaborate. I completely agree, and I would add one more detail which I failed to mention, and that is not just the Nut House, but also the alley that's right a couple of buildings over. And so the idea of on the alternate option is to actually have a little bit of an arcade with covered bicycle parking to kind of direct you toward that alley. So in general, at least at the pedestrian level, trying to open it up as much as possible along Jacaranda and the frontage of Antonio's, so that, again, a little more friendly on that facade.
Board Member Corey.
Yeah, I had two questions. One is it wasn't clear to me, is the new garage purely for the public safety building? It's not public at all? Okay.
It's a completely public garage.
Oh, it is public?
Yeah. My apologies for not clarifying that.
Yeah, because I was going to say it's a lot of parking.
It is.
There they are.
Right. So the garage serves two primary purposes from a parking standpoint. It replaces all of the parking that's been displaced on the current lots, which are public lots, public parking spaces, and it adds significantly to that parking for public because of the changes that are going in the density of the area. So it's 100% public parking in the new structure, and the 2 levels subterranean under the public safety building, those are only police. Yeah, that's the distinction. Sorry, I didn't mention that.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense.
It's a lot of parking.
That is a lot of parking, yeah, so that'll be nice. On the one other thing is and there's not really a view here, but from California Avenue where people are walking, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. That area now, it's since everything's that 1-story parking lot, it's really kind of void of anything, anything on there. So I'm trying to figure out what the angle of view from California Avenue would be, I assume, would hit those buildings because they're 3 stories. They're pretty hard to hide because you don't really see. It's kind of like just off into infinity when you look now.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, and I regret I do not have the slides. We did a series of 3D studies from a number of places, did photo montages on California Avenue, and just to answer that question, I did not put them in this show. I will for the next one. Okay. But I'll describe to you, it actually gets back to the decision about the massing too. It was actually one of our decision points, was that when we were looking at a 2-story structure which would cover the whole lot, we found its presence was much more dominating from a number of views, particularly from California Avenue, because you would see it. And you would particularly see it coming down Park when the courthouse is at an angle, then you see the long facade there. But from California Avenue, a lot of view of it. When we did the massing studies and the photomontages, the 3-story compact building was nearly unseeable from, if that's a word, from California Avenue. You'd see a tiny little corner of it. Because it was set back from the intersections, you wouldn't see it at all because it's set back on Birch significantly. So the mass of the building is largely not apparent from California Avenue in this current massing, and that actually influences. Now, one other point that I did not mention, it's a little hard to see here, the one thing that will be visible, and this is an important point, is that there will be a communications tower on the building. And because it's visible, the intent is to make it a monopole, not a truss, and it's building mounted. It's 135 feet from the ground, and you can see it in this rendering in the background here. It's not in the package that you have. So this is a work in progress, and the tower studies were going concurrent with the package we were developing, so the package you got didn't have this in it. And so the tower is here, right there, and you can see it partly here and partly on the back of the building here. We have located it mid-block, again, to minimize its visibility. You will see it from California Avenue, but it'll be a slender monopole, and that's the exception.
That makes sense. Thanks.
I'll get to Beth in a second. I just want to make a comment, Mallory. You can see, first of all, I want to thank you for coming up to us with a study session. You can see there's a lot of interest, so I'm enjoying the good conversation about this. Thank you. Yeah. Beth.
I have several questions of different natures. You did not list a jail as something that would be incorporated in that public safety building.
Correct. And a jail per se is not in the building. What the building has are what are called temporary holding cells.
Okay.
So it's a 4-hour maximum duration. It's used for processing prisoners, and and it is located the way that the building works is we have 3 stories above grade and 2 stories of parking below grade. 1 story of the public safety building is actually in that first level of the garage. So we have a number of what we would call the more noxious functions for the police station are actually 1-story subterranean. So the holding cells are in that first level of the garage, and the property and evidence storage is on the first level of the garage. So the stuff that has no windows, the stuff that's is higher security, is underground. So the process that if you had a patrol vehicle that had it in custody, they would go down the ramp from Sherman into the basement. They would go into a subterranean sally port where it would then be secured before the in custody leaves the vehicle, then goes into the temporary holding and is processed, interviewed, and whatever else they do.
All right. Next question is, did you ever consider a pedestrian bridge from the public safety over to the garage structure?
These are great questions. I love this. We actually considered a tunnel. At one point, there was a tunnel connecting the public safety garage under Birch to the parking structure, and there was more movement between the 2 structures. We determined that would be cost prohibitive, very complicated from a utility standpoint, utilities in Birch, and then as it evolved, the parking structure became strictly public. So there's no functionality for the public safety building over there. So that precluded the need for the tunnel, and probably similarly precluded the need for a bridge. Because the police department's not going to be using that at all. It's purely for public.
All right, then. I wanted to talk a little more about your choice of color. You mentioned the terracotta color. which certainly is present in Palo Alto, and you said a white plaster. Now then, in the renderings, it appears to be a stark white. Is that your intention?
Likely not stark white. Yeah.
Or did you consider a beige? And I'm thinking about the buildings that are on California. If you notice, I think practically the only white one is that painted wall at the pizza place. Mm-hmm. So that to think more about a tending to be a more beige or mustard or something of that sort, and kind of the color of my T-shirt. Yeah. Is that something that you could work with?
Yeah, on the dynamic massing, the goal would be to kind of resonate with precedents in town. So yes, absolutely. We'd be looking at some of the historic buildings and drawing from their colors on that version. On the option one, the more organic option, certainly we would use more earthy tones. So the kind of the colors you're discussing would fall into that category. So the answer is yes. And no, the reason for the white as it's currently represented is to emphasize the dynamic massing so that it's a little more assertive. And if everyone, like again, these are conversation starters, if everyone said, we really want this thing to be dynamic and really contrasting, we would probably shift toward the white just to get that push. But that's not the feedback we're getting. So I think what you're talking about in terms of the tamer colors and tamer tones is more likely the direction we're going to go.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about a big white box. Yes, it would be eye-catching, but perhaps not in a good kind of way.
Right, and the one that's most tied to that look would be the third option, where we're trying to get that French limestone, which is definitely or Sierra white granite, which are both kind of traditional civic materials in the Bay Area. That would tend more towards white and more serious and a little more austere. So that would be the one where the color would be more tied with the scheme. The other two schemes, I think, have more flexibility on the tones.
All right, then did you, so will these white boxes, for instance, have windows and
yes.
On the
yes.
second and third floors?
Yes.
I understand the security kind of thing.
They will have windows. The windows of the primary basking in daylight is going to come from a central, if you notice right here, there's a central light well in the building. So there's actually going to be a lot of light, like an interior courtyard. So the bulk of daylighting for the functions are going to come through that space. There definitely are going to be windows, but they will be smaller apertures because of the ballistic requirements. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to make it maybe narrower and taller proportioned so that they still feel generous, but there will not be large curtain walls. It will not be a large glass building because that's not.
So they do not look like gun turrets, though?
They will not look like gun turrets.
Narrow.
No. The goal is, right now, the proportions we're drawing are roughly a 3-foot wide window, vertical proportion. You can see it probably, like in these, these are approximately 3 feet wide. So no, we don't want them to ever feel, we don't want this to feel like a fortress. It's really important, and that's a constant challenge for us designing public safety buildings, but we never want them to feel like a fortress.
I think now then there are certain things that appear gray on your renderings. What is that?
Those represent in the kind of option one, the screening greening, that would be a rougher textured, maybe stone-like quality to it. Again, this is under the umbrella of more organic, so earthier or woodier kind of materials. The gray in that way is representing more of a stone-ish texture. And again, I say stone-ish because it's likely this is going to be precast concrete as the base. So we would try to achieve those textures. And this is, you're actually looking at, for instance, this is deeply textured concrete here. That's kind of what we're talking about. The grays on this one is in fact would be cast in place concrete potentially, or precast. So those were the grays. But again, I would say that these materials that we're showing are meant as triggers for conversation, because we're not actually proposing specific palette yet until we get, hear people's feedback.
All right. I am particularly hopeful that there will be some more browns, because brown, and I think your indications of terracotta, that some brown as well would be a very handy kind of, or would be related to the things that are on California Avenue. Even if you don't see them from California Avenue, it carries some of the feel.
Definitely, definitely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair Bernstein. Just a couple comments. When I look at the garage structure, correct me if I'm wrong, but does it look like there's solar arrays?
Yes. So the photovoltaic panels are represented here as part of the model.
Yeah.
And they would be relatively comprehensive across the top level, and in the building sections, whoops, they're represented by the dashed line here.
Do you know how much power they will supply will meet the needs of the building, or some percentage of the needs?
We haven't done a detailed analysis yet, but our hope, we had a couple of hopes. One is definitely try to leverage them for as much as possible for the needs of the building. And the second hope is that they actually could provide a backup function in the event of an emergency, that you could actually get redundant power through the photovoltaics. But we have not done the detailed analysis yet. It's a lot of panels, though, so you'll get a lot out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The other thing that came to my mind is buildings like public safety buildings are usually very sensitive as far as intrusion of vehicles that may be carrying things that you don't want to have around them. Ramps and things that discourage vehicle traffic, they become major architectural features in some of these buildings. Maybe you're not showing right here that will probably, the safety department was probably going to mandate some of those things on there to exclude vehicles from getting close to these buildings.
Absolutely.
They're public safety buildings.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. And that is the idea. I want to remind everybody that the subterranean parking under the public safety building is property line to property line. So any planting that you're seeing is actually on a deck, because there's no soil below. So the planting areas that we're showing that are green are all raised planters, and we are leveraging those raised planters as vehicle barriers as well, because we don't want to have a flat site and then a bunch of security bollards, like an army of bollards around the whole site to make it look like a fortress. So by having the raised planters, we actually get double duty. So you'll see, for instance, on the perimeter, and I'm going to try to get my mouse there, this is a raised planter, and then these are raised seating areas along the edge, and this is the 25-foot standoff distance, setback distance. So the goal is to actually keep vehicles from getting any closer than 25 feet to the building, and using the pedestrian amenities to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's a different type of architecture for this type of building, because you mandate the requirement to exclude vehicles from getting close to it.
Well, and we don't want this to look like what in many of the facilities in Washington, D.C., when you see the security around them, where they've had to retrofit the security, and we want this to be a friendly, landscaped, pedestrian responsive environment, and then we'll just try to use those to achieve the same goal.
Yeah. Well, I think some of those elements are going to be major features that impact the architectural feeling of the building too.
Yeah.
So the sensitivity of those and how you...
Well, and you can see a few examples here. So for instance, some of these are just precedent photographs, but you see these raised areas can achieve what our goal is. And these are photographs of other projects, but you can see that they can provide the barrier and also be visually interesting and pedestrian responsive. Yeah. That's the goal. But you're absolutely right. It's a significant factor on the character of the perimeter.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Just have a process question on the question for staff. On the report summary packet, page 6, it says HRB members should refrain from forming or expressing opinions either in support or against the project. Any clarification on that?
This is a part of a template form for preliminary study sessions. In this case, you are free to comment freely because this is not going to be coming back to you, this project.
Great, thank you for that. Next, I'd like to open up the hearing to members of the public who'd like to speak to us regarding this project. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak? Seeing none, bring it back to the board for comments or opinions. Okay. So, Board Member Wimmer.
I think, so we won't be seeing this project again, is that what you said, Amy?
That's correct. You will have an opportunity to comment on, as a member of the public, on the draft EIR that is being prepared. There was a scoping session, and there was a notice of preparation, so that comments on what should be studied were received, and none were received. But
So I guess in terms of our board, I mean, even though we aren't seeing it again, it would be nice to see further study between the impact of the parking garage as it is in elevation, like a street view next to our historic resource. So I know that there are some streetscape views in our packet, but that specific streetscape view wasn't included, which is probably what we would have wanted to see. How see the Antonio's Nut House and how how it looks in elevation, and then also just to the applicant, and I just look on for instance on the floor plan view of the parking garage at that corner as it faces the Nut House. It would be just nice if you could somehow, if there's any way you can better respond to the being adjacent to the Nut House. I don't know. Revise the opening of the pedestrian access to and from, in that upper corner, because I know in front of the Nut House there's a small parking zone. So maybe if we can unify that or make it look like it was intentional instead of just this is our parking structure doing our own thing, and we know that you're doing your own thing. And that's a bad way of describing it, but to better respond in that specific area, that would be nice.
Board Member Bunneberg.
Well, just on the subject of that parking lot, some time ago, 1979, there was a pole out front, and apparently a woman lost a bet to Tony and had to sit up on top of this pole for several days. So nutty things have gone on there. And it also was kind of a haven for Stanford students and people who really like to play pool. So it has its own little history.
Board Member Kohler.
Yeah, I guess I should state that my office was on Cambridge Avenue for 7 or 8 years, and also my rock and roll band used to play into the Nut House there. It was really it's a very important area of California Avenue, and I have the lady who still trims what hair I have left is a block away, and she's stressed out because there's nowhere to park. And so all the people who own and work at California Avenue can't wait to get the parking resolved, because it's a real problem. In fact, I sometimes have to drive around and park several blocks away. So it's pretty important and a huge, huge change to Palo Alto. I mean, this is a big deal. So the whole area of that has been changing rapidly, and to see this response is good by City of Palo Alto. So I'm looking forward to parking there someday.
Mallory, thanks for your presentation of the concepts 1, 2, and 3. I've got some comments on each of those, please. On concept 1, the screening greening, my comment is that my opinion is that would become visually tiring to see a building that's kind of mask in greening and screening. I think there's an opportunity because of the existing buildings that you clearly showed in your presentation, the articulation of a lot of the fenestrations of those buildings. There's a lot of, you see a lot of fenestration of mullion window, so there's certainly a pattern there. And I think if the building ended up being the screening option, we would lose that kind of articulation of architectural detail. So I would not select concept 1 from my point of view on that. On concept 2, dynamic massing, the idea of the materials that you're presenting in concept 2, or what was your phrase? A feeling of concept. Conversation concept of conversation. That the materials that you listed there, I think, provide better compatibility of materials. And that was evoking the traditional historic Palo Alto landmarks of light-colored cement, plaster, terracotta. Anyway, that coloration, I think, will work. I also think the dynamic massing conversation makes it more compatible with the neighborhood pattern, just as I mentioned, of all the articulation of fenestration on other buildings there. So I would select that concept. And as far as the simple civic, again, it's the white or light-colored materials. I think that would get kind of visually uninteresting, and that might be kind of tiring to look at also, or at least not so interesting. So I would vote of these concepts. I would choose the dynamic massing one, be my idea for more compatibility with the neighborhood here. There was one mentioned in our board conversation earlier about the modern and blockingness, perhaps, was one word used. So including the building eligible for National Register, the Nut House, that's also kind of a block mass structure also. So I think that the dynamic massing, I think, is compatible in that sense in terms of massing. So, okay, yeah. Either board member Vice Chair Bauer.
So because I had more experience on the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission concerning the public safety building, all of the design elements that you've discussed actually make that building, I think, a better building than would have landed on that site had it not been a public safety building. The increased space and your screening. I'm of a different opinion than Martin is about the garage. I think the foliage helps to soften the impact of what is a very big box. And over time, that changes. There's a maintenance issue there. But nonetheless, I think that visually changes with the seasons and helps to, again, camouflage it. I'm concerned about Jacaranda Lane becoming Jacaranda Canyon by two large buildings. The public safety building, again, is set back for safety reasons, and they'll be doing some work there to screen it. There is actually more space opposite the public safety building than there is opposite the parking. But I think that any effort you can make to soften that particular side with some materials that will absorb some sound will be helpful to the residents. I suspect that the California Avenue area is going to see the same kind of pressure of expansion that downtown has, because that's now pretty much the last area you can expand in. I'm not concerned about the size of these buildings because the courthouse sets a perfectly bad example of what we did in 1960. And I don't think that's seismically, I don't think they can upgrade that to meet the current standards. So I think at some point that building will have to be replaced. So these buildings will be in two important ways, a shift of our policing and fire control functions to the center of Palo Alto. This particular site represents almost the dead center of the city, and it has very easy access to El Camino, to Alma, and to Page Mill, Oregon. So those are major arteries that allow our police and fire services to actually move faster to the city. Obviously, Foothill Park area is excluded from that. So whatever you can do, I like that second option with the garage of opening it up. I think that'll help with the parking lots Antonia's Nut House, and look forward to seeing this conversation move forward quickly, since we definitely need both of these buildings.
Board Member Corey.
I'm going to appreciate all the work you guys have put into this. I also agree with David. I think parking lots are tough generally because we didn't have parking lots 100 years ago, right? So they kind of stick out there, and the ones that I have seen that have some sort of greening on them, I think it really does help to soften those. So I just wanted to say I also liked the greening concept, especially for the parking garage, because I think that will help it kind of blend in more with the neighborhood. There's a lot of trees and vegetation out there now, so it's kind of, makes it a little less apparent to look at. Thanks very much.
And Mallory, I've got one other idea that I liked what you presented, and that was the on the corner closest to the back of Antonia's Nut House is the idea of that splayed entry stair. I think that's a great gesture. Because they're right between, I think it's Birch, and is it? Nut House is on the corner of Birch, right? Yeah. Birch, yeah. So we're as people, there's a parking lot between Birch Street and the Antonia's Nut House there. So that means people are lingering there. So that is a good chance for people to see that splayed. So I think that's a really wonderful thing to do. And also on using the plaza design shown in your concept 1, where there's just a lot of different angles. I think that's a really nice relief from any kind of the boxing and massiness that might be perceived for these two buildings. I've seen that often in Chicago, where the public areas are, have the rectangular buildings, but the public plaza area is similar to your concept 1 area. And I think that makes a nice little softening and nice little human scale gesture. So that combined with that splayed entryway supports, I like your other phrase, you said a visually porous at that corner. So if we end up with the heading more in the greening direction, still keeping that one corner where that splayed entry stair is, and keeping that visually porous, I think that makes a good compatible connection between California Avenue and particularly the National Register eligible building. Any other comments from board members? Okay. All right. I believe that would then, any other conclusions from staff before we conclude?
No, I thank you for your input, as do the applicants. So this is going to the ARB, let's see, next week, June 1st. So I'll convey a quick summary to the ARB of your comments.
Great. And Mallory, thank you so much. Wonderful. Excellent. Good. All right, that concludes this agenda item. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Okay, we are ready for our next agenda item, and I'll read that description. This is a study session, 640 Waverly Mixed-Use Project Study Session, and I'll read it. Historic Resources Board study session to discuss a preliminary architectural review application for a mixed-use building to replace 2 structures on a downtown site determined ineligible for listing as historic resources. Shall staff have an introductory report for us?
Yes, so this application is a preliminary architectural review, so the time is right for a study session by the HRB. This is another project where it's not going to be coming back as a formal to the HRB because there is no, it's been determined that the structures on the site are not eligible for, a register, historic register, based on the work that was done by several historic consultants. So this is coming to you with the desire, and the applicant voluntarily has come forward because it's, an important area of downtown, and it's an area that is changing on this very street. The urban design guidelines do refer to this kind of changing area that's going from the downtown proper into a residential area. So this is a transitional area. And so there's some potential treatments along the street. There is a P, right, CDCP So there's a P zoning combining district that goes with this. So pedestrian friendliness is important, as is the compatibility with the adjacent buildings. And of course, there's two very different buildings on each side. To the left, as you look at the existing structures, is a listed city inventory historic resource, I believe category 2, and that was remodeled within the last decade and is there to stay. And then the building to the right, which is nearing completion, I guess, under construction, that went through an architectural review process all the way up to council. So we don't have, staff does not have a presentation of the design images, but the applicant does, and we'll be showing that to you. So again, the goal of this session is just to provide input on the proposal, to assist staff in assessing the project's compatibility with the adjacent historic resources at 650 Waverly. And the relevance of the downtown urban design guidelines. This is what the Architectural Review Board is attuned to doing, and they have a finding 2B regarding compatibility. We're looking towards bringing this to the Architectural Review Board on June 15th?
Correct.
Okay, for preliminary review. And then we'll be conveying the minutes of this meeting to the ARB so they can see what the HRB had opinions about. So again, you can express yourself freely on this one because it's not going to be coming back to the HRB. Thank you. Let me introduce Graham Owen, the project planner, and we can, if you wanted to add anything more on this, and then call up the applicant for the presentation.
I didn't have anything further to add. Yeah, this will be going to the ARB on the 15th of June, so we welcome your input.
Okay, I'd like to welcome the applicant to address us, please.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, Chair Bernstein, members of the board. My name is Ken Hayes with Hayes Group Architects. Can you hear me? You look like you couldn't hear me. Good morning. My name is Ken Hayes with Hayes Group Architects. I'll be making the presentation on behalf of our clients who could not be here. They're out of the country, but James Lynn and Clarissa Shen would have liked to have been here. Hopefully, they'll be at the ARB meeting in 2 weeks. I'd like to thank Amy and Graham for helping us bring this application before you. The site is a difficult to see site on this slide. Can it be made brighter by any chance? No? Okay. It's a mid-block 50 by 105 foot site, and it is adjacent to an existing Category 2 historic structure. There are 2 structures on the site itself that have, as Amy said, been determined to not be eligible for any kind of historic listing, and they'll be demolished. Let me find my cursor. This is the site here. The Category 2 historic building to the south was remodeled in 2006, probably came before some of you. The probably first half of the site of the house is the original, and then they've added about the same amount of square footage to the rear of the house. To the north, if you will, of the site here is that new 4-story mixed-use building under construction. Behind the site is the city's parking lot on Gilman Street, an open parking lot. The surrounding sites, or the zoning, is all CDCP, so it has that pedestrian overlay. It is next to the PF zone, which is the parking facility, the post office, et cetera. And also a street away or a parcel away from higher density RM40 zoning. But we are all surrounded by the CDC pretty much. This is just a figure ground study just to show how the ARB likes to see these diagrams so that they understand how the massing of the figure shows compatibility or not with surrounding buildings. And so this is intended to display that in the site. I don't see the cursor. Is it up there? Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah, it's hard to see. And so the site is right there. So it's consistent with the development intensity, I think, around it. Existing site views. This is the property here. This will be demolished. There's a building behind this that will also be demolished. The 4-story mixed-use building here, obviously. The historic house is located to the left here, to the south. I'm getting a glare off that screen. But real challenge in how we fit in with both of those two very different styles of architecture, massing from a 2-story building to a 4-story building. So that was our challenge. The program is to include the construction of a new mixed-use residential office building, including about 5,200 square feet of office space and a single-family home for our clients who intend on living there. The building will step back as it rises to recognize the existing house and the scale of the house to the south, and to create opportunities for outdoor living, because essentially we're covering the site almost with the building. So we want to create outdoor living spaces. Imagery that we're working with is sort of these clean, modern forms, deep recesses, an abundance of glass, quality, lasting materials. Some of these images were also used as the inspiration for the 4-story building next door. But this idea of this eyebrow tracery that wraps the building is very apparent in the building to the north. And so that's an element that we'd like to carry into the new building to help relate it. And then this here is just an idea of these outdoor living spaces for our clients and their young children. So this is the streetscape. You can see the historic building here. And then the 4-story building here. Then it steps back down to 2 stories. There's actually, I think, a 5-story condominium building here to the left on the corner, which we're not showing, not quite part of the immediate context. This is a view of just maybe the first 20 feet of the site, just so you can see both simultaneously. But I'd like to point out first the historic building plan is set back probably 3 feet from the property line, maybe a little bit more. We're at 12 feet to the first part of our building, and about 16 and a half feet to this part of the building here where the glass is. So it's about 16 and a half feet there and about 12 feet to the part above. So we're trying to step back, also creating the driveway on that side of the building to, again, create some open space between the historic Category 2 building and our project. So let me walk you through this. We're trying to align the main part of the building, you can see with the red line there, with the porch of the historic building next door. I think it helps with the transition. It also, I think, helps with the transition from a more urban downtown to the more residential zoning district to the south of the site. So that alignment is something that was a conscious effort. And then the idea of trying to create a front porch, which we think is important to get eyes on the street, but also to relate to the historic building next door. And so this yellow part defines that porch that projects about 5 feet off of the main facade of the historic building. And so we're doing a similar thing with this element in front, a little bit larger scale, but that piece is pretty much separated from our building, which is set back to create a porch, and then on that second floor, it's actually an outdoor terrace for our clients, for the home above. Then we have the organization of the facade of the historic building, which is divided kind of like into this triptych. It's a 3-bay, 3 equal bays, kind of a classical order. We've taken that and elevated it, and the facade, main facade of the building, not unlike the main facade or how the porch relates to the historic building, also has this same kind of proportion. In fact, the proportion is identical, how we're dividing that main window into their living room into these 3 vertical bays to create some subtle relationships and derivation. Then we have some general alignments. First, the transition. We have been working with the neighbor at 650, the Category 2 building, and we've reached an agreement with him. He's in support of the project. He's actually written a letter that we've provided to staff. I'm sorry it wasn't in your package, but we've worked with Roger McCarthy now for about 2 years to arrive at a solution that is acceptable to him in terms of light and air. And the massing, because he has a lot of windows on that side of the home. So this shows this transition that we're really trying to create between the 4-story building, how it steps down to our 3-story building, and then further down to the 2-story historic home. We're in fact taking the reference of the sloped roof of the historic building because we feel like that's more residential in nature, and using it for the 3rd floor of our building. So we take that sloped roof form and incorporate it on our building. Then we have general alignments that the porch railing aligns with the railings. Hopefully you can see it on your monitor. I can't see it up there because of the glare. But we have these important alignments that I think help create, again, relationships between the various buildings. Again, the alignment of the main floor with the 2nd floor with our 2nd floor. The alignment with this tracery that runs around the building, I think, is important. And so we're doing that with our porch element out in front. So this is a blow-up now of that front facade. So you can see the materials we're thinking would be lots of glass to let light in. The ground floor is intended to be commercial space. There is a level below grade. I'll show you that in a second. The residential components will be wood siding, and then we're looking at concrete and metal. That helps a little bit. A little bit, yeah. Thank you, Amy. This is the side of the building that faces the 4-story building next door. There's about 12 inches between the 2 buildings, so this, in fact, won't be seen by anybody, but we're trying to take the roof up and over the back side of the building. This is the side of the building that faces 650 Waverly. So everything from about here forward is between 12 and 16 and a half feet back from the property line. This portion here is closer to the property line, about 20 inches, but that's also about where the transition occurs between the addition and the original building next door. So we didn't really see any impacts there, but trying to keep this part of the building pushed away. And the zone in between is, in fact, our driveway. Then this is the back of the building that faces the public parking, the parking lot. I believe there's a 5 or 6 foot fence there that we're not showing at this point. But this is a residential balcony. This is all residential, and then this will be the commercial space here, and then there's a commercial space below. So the ground floor here has the driveway located there. This would take you into where we have the residential parking. So the residential will be fully parked. They'll have a turntable in the garage. They can drive in forward, turn the car around on the turntable, and drive out forwards, so not to create any kind of traffic issues here on the street. We have at the front of the building a sunken garden this glass line here that I showed you aligns with the porch here, extends down into the garden level where we intend to have trees planted, other vegetation for the benefit of not only people passing by, but also for the inhabitants of the commercial space in the basement. The same thing happens at the back of the building, so we've had a sunken garden at the rear of the building as well. The entry to the residential portion is the furthest one to the left. They would walk in there. They have access to the elevator. The entrance to the commercial portion would be here in the front where we have kind of a covered porch, and then that porch extends back as a covered protection back to the residential entry. Moving up in the building, this is the 2nd floor, living room, dining, kind of kitchen, living, family room. Informal area of the house spills out to a rooftop terrace here. Family room sort of divides that terrace from another terrace towards the rear. We have like a work room and a project room located at this level, along with the kitchen that sort of interacts here. We envision this wall could probably open up, but it's intended to live to the outside. And then the 3rd floor steps back further, overlooks a larger living room space with the glass that wraps the corner, 3 bedrooms, and then the master bedroom has a private balcony. On both the 2nd floor and the third floor, we would envision heavy landscaping on this side for privacy concerns, for buffering reasons, which is also something that's important when adjacent to these other residential uses. And I have some 3D views that are in your packet as well. I think there's two options in your packet. We're really prefer, I think, this option as opposed to the flat roof option, just because we think it helps a little bit with the transition to the residential, because it just conveys, I think, more of a residential feel with the sloped roof. This gives you an idea. This is the sunken garden in front. We envision that being planted, so there'd be trees coming up potentially. Enhanced paving here. The office entries there. The residential entry will be down the sidewalk here. This is this porch element out in front that really kind of starts to relate to this element here. It is separated from the window in the back. It isn't, it's intended to be a porch to reinforce that edge out in front. When you walk out to where this person is standing on the balcony, you're in fact underneath it. Might be a little more difficult to understand this view, but it's above from the south. The historic home is in the foreground, and it shows the second floor terrace in the middle there that opens up from the kitchen. The third floor terrace on top of the family room there, which opens into the where the master bedroom is. And then to the right here, you can see the porch element as it wraps. And this is the front terrace. The sloping roof, 4-story building behind. And these are dormer-like elements that define the 2 bedrooms that are on the third floor. And we felt like that helped break down the scale a little bit and picks up on some of the dormer elements, not copying them, but the notion of a dormer and having the mass of that roof broken up a little bit. And this is a view from the rear. Here's the historic building here. This is, in fact, the modern addition to the historic building, which is here in front. And then a view from the street with the whole composition shown there. And so we've always envisioned this as a kind of a duet. This project fell way behind in the process, but way back, these had at one time been planned together, although working with the neighbor here at 650 Waverly has really changed this building in between, I think, a lot for the better, because it does tend to transition, I think, a lot better than we had before. That is the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm excited to hear any comments also. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So we'll start with questions to the applicant or staff, and then open up to the members of the public, and then we'll continue on with our bringing it back to the board. Yes, Board Member Kohler.
Yeah, I just have to disclose that the building on the right side was, I did the initial studies for the owner, and as it grew beyond what my expertise was, it got turned over to Ken, who is used to this kind of stuff. So I just wanted, okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. I had actually forgotten that, Rod.
Board, you have your light on? Okay.
Let's see. I would like to step back a bit and think again about this smaller building that is on the property now. Actually, there are 2. Mm-hmm. One is
1904, I think.
04, and the other one is 1908.
Correct.
And our downtown guidelines talk about the transition from a business district to homes, residential homes. And I'm thinking about the other part of that, which is the transition of homes to businesses. And 1904 is 10 years after Palo Alto became a city. There are not a whole lot of buildings of that age left. And 1908 is quite early, so that I would like to recommend a fuller study of whether that in fact, is not an important building, because we talk about the frequent statement is something that was once common and is now rare. And to me, this feels like certainly a case where these small houses were common because it was where the residential part was starting. And now there are not many of them left. So I would like to respectfully ask for more thought in that area. I think that the setback that even currently exists with the 1908 structure is a very welcome green break in that block. So it sounds like you are increasing that rather than decreasing. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. It may be about the same. I think, yeah, we probably are a few feet further back. So we're going to align with the porch of the historic building to the south. And so that is further back than the existing 1908 house.
Than the setback that is there. To me, it still doesn't feel like a full transition from the very beautifully restored yellow historic building. I don't know if you ever considered a peaked roof rather than a slant roof.
I think it's probably in our archives somewhere. I think that in the end, trying to blend both the buildings, this evolved from having it as a flat element to a sloped element. I could certainly pull back out what we had before. I'm not sure if it, well, it becomes a little problematic, but I could certainly look and see what we have on that. It's not something that we are, promoting now, but that's...
All right, I think those are my questions for now.
Okay.
Vice Chair Bauer.
So I'm having trouble finding the overall height of your building. I see on the sections, we can see where the floor levels are.
Yeah, we're about 39 feet to the peak of this roof here.
So I guess my question is there a reason why the second floor needed to be 14 feet above grade, above your finished floor level? This is...
So it's commercial space, whether it's retail at some point or office space. Those are the kind of heights that are more in demand, I think. They make sense with the mechanical systems. That also aligns with the building next door.
But your third floor is at the level of the peak of the roof on the historic house next door. Isn't it 26?
Correct, 26 feet.
Right.
Correct, right.
So you're building another whole story above that.
Right.
Which, I'm asking these questions because in terms of compatibility, this volume is significantly larger. It doesn't even stop remotely close to the top of the historic building.
Well, it's also stepped back quite a ways. I don't have that dimension in front of me, but from the, right, it moves. Right. I'm talking about moves back from Waverly.
Yeah.
I should point out, to the left-hand side of the historic building is a
I know.
A huge building.
Yeah,
so if you look at it all in context,
I know, 1970s mistake.
Right.
But we hopefully don't want to make more mistakes.
Right.
We want to do better.
That was one of the reasons we went to this sloped roof, because it allowed us to lower the plate height of that third floor. So the third floor plate height is about 8 feet, which is a normal home. So if you walk into the master bedroom, the plate height is at 8 feet. Before we had it flat, it was taller than that. So this also helped to lower that third floor. So it's about 8 feet above it's 34 feet. Yeah. As opposed to 26 at the floor line and then 34.
Okay, great, thank you.
Board Member Corey.
I had two questions. One is, I'm trying to, that you had that slide earlier that showed the hipped roof and the going upwards and that slant. Is it from this picture and several of these other pictures? It doesn't look like it lines up. I'm trying to get a better view of that.
You're referring to.
It was this really early.
Yeah, right here.
That one.
This guy.
So does that slope up? Is that angle change, or I'm just trying to? Maybe it's just the angle.
No,
change.
well, this angle. I don't think we're matching the slope of the historic building. Right.
Okay.
If that's your question, we're not. I think we're less of a slope. If we match the slope, it would jack the roof up even higher. So we were lowering that down, but it does not match. I think the existing house is probably 4 and 12, the historic home.
That's what I assume. Yeah. Okay.
And I think we're 3 and 12.
3 and 12. Okay. And the second question, kind of, maybe this is a question for the city. So if we add this this big office retail space at the ground, what's the parking situation like? Because if it's now, with the structure it is now, I assume there's not really any strict parking requirements. It seems like we added one spot for the residents.
So the residential is parked per the requirements of 1852. The commercial part is in lieu. Because of the size of the site, we'd be paying in lieu for the parking for the commercial. And it's, there's 5,200, and so that's 22 spaces, I think, or 21 spaces, correct? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Graham, we need your mic. We can't hear you.
My apologies. Yeah, so 23 spaces proposed for the entire development, 21 of which would be paid in lieu. So just the 2 for the residential.
Okay.
Okay. Board Member Wimmer.
Yes, I would like to echo the concern of Board Member Bauer about nowhere on your drawings has any reference to the heights of the proposed building. And I think we also need to be reminded of the height of 636. I know that's not the subject property, but I do think that you need to include the heights of that building. And does this new proposed project max out the property in terms of what your allowable floor area allowance is?
It does for the
commercial. Is it maxed out?
For the commercial component, I believe it does. 5,200, and maybe we're 10 square feet under. For the residential component, I don't think it does.
Was it like close, or is it?
Let me look at the. It should be in your drawings as well.
Yeah. Is it on the front page?
On A0.4, there's 4,400, approximately 4,500 square feet of residential. So that's about 750 square feet less than what we're allowed. Yeah. So it's not maxing the whole development out.
I have a question picking up on Board Member Bunnenberg's comment regarding the historic determination for the existing buildings there. I see the evaluator of the building structure and object record is Stacy DeShazo. Is that hired by the city, or is that hired by the applicant?
That was hired by the applicant. So let me just give a little history on the analysis. So the applicant came in with a historic resource evaluation. Matt Weintraub, our prior historic planner, was here, had a look at it, gave some feedback, said it was not adequate. So then there was a peer review by
DUDEC.
DUDEC, the city's consultant. So Samantha Murray of DUDEC, she assisted with that peer review of that original report. And then the applicant came back with this final report, basically, that addressed those comments, came to the same conclusion, but provided a more robust study as had been commented by the city's hired consultant as necessary. And then, yes,
May I add one more thing? Yeah. So the first consultant was past consultants. When we received the feedback from DUDEC on the initial evaluation. We went back to our original consultant, and he had left the area, so he was not working in Palo Alto any longer. So we had to find a new historic consultant, and that's when Evans DeSharo was hired by my client. Evans DeSharo did the report, taking into consideration the feedback from the original historic consultant's report and DUDEC's feedback, prepared their report, and then that was then subject to DUDEC's peer review. And there were some comments that DUDEC made, and we had addressed those, and that's the report that you have in front of, that was included in the packet. Okay. But all the reports that we've had have come to the same conclusion.
Does the city's historic consultant agree that the buildings lacked merit for preservation?
Yes, they agreed with the conclusion and just asked for a beefier study.
Okay. Question for staff, or perhaps Graham. It says here on packet page 104, the applicant has been advised that a single-family residential unit is not a permitted use in this district. And yet we're seeing a single-family residence proposed. How do we respond to that unpermitted use?
So at this point, the application is a preliminary review, so no formal action is requested for the ARB component of this project. But staff has reviewed it almost as if it were a formal application. So during that initial review, we did our code compliance review, and one of the things that we were looking at in particular is that the CDC district allows mixed use, and multifamily is one of those permitted uses, but single family is not expressly authorized in the zoning code as a component of a mixed use project that can be included in the CDC.
So should we be looking at a project that has a non-permitted use?
Well, your role here is you're looking at a mixed-use building that's come forward, and there's no requirements for the HRB to weigh in on zoning compliance. Again, we're just looking at, the compatibility aspects and relationships and context.
So is it possible? Thank you for that. Is it possible that this project as presented, may never happen because it's non-permitted?
At this point, with this project, we're not asking for a formal recommendation for the director to make a decision on the project at this point. If there's certainly ways in which the project could change, of course. Yeah. There's always the possibility that there are zoning code amendments that go in line with this project to further clarify what the zoning would be, what the permitted uses on the site would be.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. And also, it adds living units downtown, which is good for the environment. So there's certainly a community benefit for having residential use in downtown. I agree with that idea. Okay. All right. Board Member Bunnenberg.
Yes, I had another area to think about in terms of the historic standing of that building. A part of the report was the replacement of whatever window was on the front with a larger, not picture window, but a bigger pane of glass, which in some ways is not surprising for a building of this age. But then it talked about the fact that the small building no longer had the integrity of the surrounding buildings. The little buildings, it's not the little buildings' fault that those buildings are gone. And so I do have some concern about the historic report on that basis.
Okay, I'd like to bring members of the public, one other question, please. Board Member McKenna, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bernstein. I think the project does have an impact upon the historic house, the yellow house that's adjacent to it. This project clearly is dominant as far as the neighborhood goes, including the project that is currently being built that kind of sets the tone for it. But that house, the yellow house, is a Gustav Laumeister house, one of the more significant builders and architects in Palo Alto. And I think this project does have an impact on the contextuality of that house and its setting. It sits there by itself now with nothing else around it that relates to it. It's totally alone.
You're talking about the yellow house?
Yeah. The yellow house, yes.
I don't understand. There's buildings on both sides of it. The yellow house?
Yes.
Yeah. Aren't there buildings on both sides?
Yes.
So we'll go to the question first, and then we'll open the public now.
I think the project just adds another contextuality issue that wasn't there before. That's my main point.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to open up this portion of the meeting to the public. If there's any members of the public like to speak to us on this proposed project or this proposal. Seeing none, we'll move it back to the board for comments. Board Member Vice Chair Bauer.
So I appreciate your efforts to bring this before us. I know it's not required. I share Michael's concern about the historic building, the yellow house, being overwhelmed, but the building next to this at what, 640, 636? 636. One that's been under construction for the last 25 years. That's even worse. I mean, that overwhelms the entire neighborhood, so anything that's better than that would be better than nothing. But I still think this new building that we're looking at today is overwhelming, and I'm not sure there's anything we can do about it, but I think that needs to be said. Also, I have a problem with the updated historic evaluation. Under on page 143 of our packet, which is page 33 of this report, under a discussion of whether the structure has particularly representative of an architectural style or way of life important to the city, they say this is obviously a vernacular bungalow, is very typical of houses built from the early 1900s to about the 1930s in Palo Alto. We are losing these buildings at an incredibly rapid rate. And one of the conclusions here is that it is not, and I'm quoting here, an excellent example or representation of this bungalow style. I wonder whether every building that has significance has to be excellent. There are many buildings that represent a combination of styles and craftsmanship that aren't the best, but still represent a significant a statement in our architectural history. Second, on the next page, under 6, structure and site contains elements demonstrating outstanding attention to architectural design, detail, materials, and craftsmanship. Again, there's an opinion here in that next paragraph, in the paragraph that says, neither the building is designed with elements that demonstrate outstanding attention. When you use a superlative as your method or your level of comparison, almost nothing qualifies. So these reports obviously are intended to move a project forward. I don't think this report, and I can give you another example in the report back on page 155, where they talk about there were significant changes to Waverly Street and the surrounding blocks, and use that as another example of how this has an insignificant building and doesn't rise to the level of protection. If we were to measure every block, if we were to say any block that changes no longer would qualify any house on it to be protected, I think we've eliminated a huge housing number of buildings in the city and most cities. So I'm troubled by the way this report was done. I think that it's overstating the insignificance of these buildings. The windows that have been removed could easily be replaced. That's what we call removing non-compliant features and installing ones that are compliant. It's done all the time in historic districts. So I just think the record ought to reflect that these are not insignificant buildings. And even though the streets changed and there's a significantly larger building just 2 properties over, I think that's not really reflected in the report.
I agree with Vice Chair Bauer's comments on the report. So the official report for this in our packet is the historic preservation conclusion recommendations from a provider of service that was not the city's consultant. We don't have the city's consultant's report in front of us. Is there a city's consultant's report?
Yes, I originally had that attached to this report, but it was removed as, just provide the final. So, that could be mailed to you so you can see the chain of, how things progressed. Yeah. There were a lot of reports back and forth.
And I also agree with Vice Chair Bauer's comment about when superlatives are used to be the measure. I think that would eliminate a lot of existing category structures because a lot of them are not, I would say, excellent examples. And then when there's also the comment in this DeShazo's report saying, but many things have been removed already, so what's the significance? Well, that's not a good measure of importance. So I'm also troubled the fact that the official report here is just showing a report at that level of wording. So, regarding the purview of our board regarding what's compatibility issues with adjacent historic structures, I'm referring to 650 Waverly Street, that's the Category 2 structure. In fact, it was 2003 where I moved to, made a motion to have that Category 2, and it was seconded by Vice Chair Roger Kohler at the time. That was in 2003, so 14 years ago that happened. So that building's been historic for a significant time frame. Looking at the character defining aspects of the Georgian Revival Category 2 structure, you've got the pilasters on the side, the frame, and so that creates a certain rigid frame appearance there. And then you got the nice little porch detail in the middle. So there's certainly symmetry about that. Ken, thank you for coming to us for a study session. We really appreciate that. And I also want to commend you on 636 Waverly Street. I looked at that building, and that design by itself, I truly believe it's masterful. The way, if you look at forget about the context issue, but the way you did it's quite masterful. And then the proposal for 640 is certainly compatible with that, no question. So that's highly, highly successful. But from the HRB's point of view, we have a Category 2 structure over here. And I am not seeing the compatibility of the 640 proposal with the 650. You mentioned some good conversational starting points of how do you get the framing of the front porch concept. I think that's a really excellent way of as an opportunity for compatibility. Therefore, it becomes the scale of that. And I know that's common for you to put the horizontal lines across. I think that's also a good analytic tool to understand relationships. What's the phrase you used for the concrete ribbon? There was a phrase I think you used.
Just the tracery.
Tracery, yeah. Well, if you use if that somehow can relate more to the Georgian proportions of height and width, and the scale of that and the massing of that, then that can get a little more compatibility. I'm just not seeing this to be compatible at all with the Georgian style house there. You can use modern techniques, and you're a genius of doing that. It's the scale, dimensions, just more visual techniques to get it more compatible, and I don't see the compatibility there, and that is our charge. That combined with the again, the quality of the historic report that's been mentioned by 3 board members here, I'm concerned that we're not getting compatibility, which is part of the, I believe that's going to be one of the findings language for the ARB, I think, compatibility. Let me see if I can find that wording.
Yes, it's in the report.
Yeah, I saw
we'll give
that.
you the packet page.
169.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just read that for our conversation. So architectural review findings, that's attachment B, packet page 169. It says, the project has a unified and coherent design that preserves, respects, and integrates existing natural features that contribute positively to the site and the historic character, including historic resources of the area when relevant. I do not see how this drawing that we have now contributes positively to the historic character of the Category 2 structure. I don't see how that finding can be made. So if there's any revision to the proposal, you're hearing some comments from the HRB. Go ahead and, using the modern architectural language, I have no issue with that, but it's the scale, massing, and how creatively can that happen? Still address the client's design for this. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
If you're welcome to respond, I would please welcome.
Well, I think I pointed out how we were trying to relate, and it was really about alignment in plan, alignment in elevation. In my mind, there's nothing more massive about what I see with the tracery than what I see with the fascia line of the historic home, and that's what we're relating to. So that 26-foot piece relates to that the white band of the historic building. And so I thought that we were pulling it off, actually. So I'm very surprised by that comment, but I'll take it to heart.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd say, I'm sorry, Board Member Bauer.
Michael, what's your phrase that you use about the effective area of impact or something?
Area of effect?
Potential effect.
What is it?
Especially.
Or the area of potential effect.
Right, area of potential effect.
Yeah.
It's, I guess it's a federal phrase. Michael could speak more to it, but when I look at this, I have the same response, which is the 2 buildings now are overwhelming the Georgian historic building, and that's, I guess, where I have trouble with compatibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Next steps. So we have our comments.
I don't know if you've.
But are there more?
Comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see your line. Board Member Wimmer.
Yeah, so I think the existing building that's under construction right now at 636 is really abrupt. You drive down that street and it's just like, I don't think the elephant in the room really describes what that building is doing on that street.
I agree.
And I think it's very insensitive to the street, and it's kind of insensitive to the immediate surroundings, and it's kind of insensitive to the community of Palo Alto, because there are a lot of residents in Palo Alto who have voiced their concern and their being upset about the fact that the city of Palo Alto would allow such a building to be built. And I think we have to balance what the property owners want and you're a very talented architect, and you're trying to satisfy what your clients want. And you found a way to do that under the parameters of what the city of Palo Alto allows. And that's what that building is. It's you've designed it per what your clients asked you to do. You've passed it through the city. But there's some disconnect because the community is not responding positively, and we see that this building is not compatible with its surroundings. So I think there's something's out of balance. And then with this addition, or excuse me, this new structure, the same owner, is it the same owner?
No.
Same architect. It looks like, I mean, it's clearly an addition to the building that's being built. I mean, this building clearly ties into it. It has the same materials. It's the same style. This tracery is, you're following that. So to me, This is an addition to the building that's being constructed now that so many people have a problem with. So when you're showing the existing building at 636 and the historic Georgian building at 650, I see that your new proposal at 640 it's a transition. You're trying to respond to the historic building by going from, the very tall, abrupt, insensitive building to a historic building and saying, hey, look, I'm in between. But if we just put our hand over the existing building being built and just analyze the 650 and the 640, I don't see any compatibility there at all. And I know that you're saying that you're lining things up, and you're saying that this new building has a front porch. I don't see anything that looks like a front porch there to me. That looks like an addition to a flawed building that's at 636. And then I hear you saying, well, that the neighbors and they're being supportive. I don't know why they would be supportive, but even if they are supportive of this, they're just stewards of that building for a certain period of time. They're not going to own 650 forever. So we have to look at 650 forever. We have to figure out what's compatible with that building for beyond the time that we're all here. So even if he doesn't have a problem with it personally, that doesn't really even affect or impact my response, because he's just the steward of that building, and we should look at that building as an integral part of Palo Alto's history. So I mean, obviously I don't think it's incompatible. I know that we did not, as a board, review 636. It didn't even come to us. And I'm not sure why. I guess because it's not right next to a historic resource. Maybe it could have come to us. I don't know. But I think you're just continuing an abrupt, insensitive effort. And as Martin just read, the requirements of what the city is looking for here, it's looking for respect. And I think this is continuing an insensitive disrespect. And I'm sensitive to you because I know that you're just trying to make things happen. I'm in the same business.
I was thinking that this proposal actually justified the building at 636. It helps it reduce in scale. It gives it a little more confirmation. And then how do we transition that to the historic building? And that's where this notion of creating the alignments, creating the front porch, recessing the building back so that it related to the plan of the historic building, were ways of doing it without trying. I mean, we know we don't want to copy the historic building. It sounds like we have a difference in aesthetic direction. We typically work in a more modern aesthetic. And so I wouldn't see a building here that pretends to be a Georgian revival, building. I don't think that does anything for the historic building, when in fact, keeping something distinct gives that much more prominence, I think, or gives the historic building a little bit more of a frame.
But I think also maybe there's a lesson that we can learn here. I mean, Palo Alto is transitioning. We're tearing down some of these older, smaller properties. The property values are so immense that we have to provide buildings like this so that owners can maintain their property values. There's a lot of factors that come into play. I just think that, I mean, maybe downtown, maybe we need a historic guideline for downtown, or I know that the ARB is really sort of heads that effort, but to guide what happens downtown. But I just think maybe it's just stronger guidance. Maybe it's by the city needs to guide the applicants in a stronger way that we don't have these abrupt, insensitive. Because now it sets a precedent, so now other people are going to continue that same, maximize it, and I just hope that we can just learn from it and just be more sensitive for future applications.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, please do, Ken.
Do you, I mean, for this to work for my client, they need 3 stories. And so do you not see a 3-story building on this property? I mean, that's the question that needs to be asked. I mean, I hear people saying, or members saying, massive, too big, huge impact. 3 stories is not very tall, but is that the issue? I mean, I know that we've just heard from Board Member Wimmer about the style and so on, but regardless of that, from a massing standpoint, where do we stand with 3 stories? Because I don't know if anything less than that will work.
Yeah. I can respond to that. Other board members may also. The prescription is not the solution of massing. So you can have a 4-story building so it's all perception, and that's where the genius of your design can come in, is that it's what's the perception of the massing. So no prescription of height, no prescription of stories. I don't find that as a measure. So it's just the detailing. Ken, when you mention things aligning, I'm looking on your page A0.2. Just responding to your comment about lining. Let me know when you have it.
I have it here.
Yeah. So you're talking about alignment. So I see the tracery at 640. That's not lining up with any significant. What's that lining up with?
Yeah, it looks like it's lining up with the 3rd floor of 640 or 636, right?
Oh yeah, the little dormer. No. Oh, I thought it was.
650.
I was looking.
Yeah, I misspoke. It looks like.
Yeah, so that tracery, that's not lining up with any significant feature of 650.
Right. So that could help, actually, lowering that.
Yes, exactly. So you get the, I agree. And then the tracery element near the front door of 640, yeah, that's not relating anything at all to 650. So that was part of my comment, is that how do you get the massing of 640 in more relation to 650, the Category 2 structure? I made a little thought to myself about, so the 650 has the pilasters framing it. So if your tracery, which is a modern detail, the way you've designed it, if that can somehow act the same way, so you still get your contemporary expression, you're still doing the tracery issues, getting the heights is so that prominent tracery mass is visually and perceptibly equal to what's going on with the historic structure. That's stepping toward the compatibility. And then the 3rd floor, if somehow, and it's a good thing you're looking at to how do you make that compatible with 636 Waverly, just because that's part of our visual world also.
Right.
But if there's something more dominant with your tracery in terms of height, somehow, so that it relates to the frame of the 650 of the pilasters, and then the strong pediment.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, there's a direction there. Then your architectural modern details, and how you relate that to your 636, so that the block has that kind of compatibility. You are right in your words that it's a challenge, and how fortunate that your clients have you as an architect.
Thanks.
Yeah. Right, so those are the comments.
Well, thank you very much. That's why we wanted to come before you, so I appreciate it.
Okay, good. As far as the next step, Amy, for this project, just the comments get transferred?
Yeah, so we'll hopefully get the minutes turned around and provided to the ARB in their packet that goes out in a couple weeks. And then, of course, they would submit a formal after hearing comments from the ARB.
Yeah.
Then they would have the opportunity to submit a formal application to address the comments that they've heard.
Okay. Any other comments for HRB before we conclude? So, Board Member Corey.
Yeah, one other question. So the distance between this building, you know, I was thinking about Margaret's comments about how these buildings kind of like complement each other. Is the distance there mostly so there can be a slope roof with that daylight plan? I'm trying to understand why it's so close up against 636, so the new 640.
Yeah, so the setbacks are 0 in the downtown, and so it's a matter of trying to maximize our square footage, as simple as that. And then we've set back at the front. So there's no parking below our building, but the building next door does have parking below it, so that starts to dictate where that wall above goes as well. So yeah, it's a matter of just trying to, it's a 50-foot wide lot, so it's...
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand if maybe breaking that up a little more might help. I mean, yeah, of course, I've heard from all the neighbors and people downtown that, you know, nobody's thrilled with 636 as far as like that abruptness out there. So it's kind of like this is almost making it like a bigger building. So I see what you're trying to do there. I'm just wondering if that may help, since it does seem to kind of complement that building rather than something separate. But
yeah, I was thinking it actually helps it fit in my opinion, the 636 building, by having this transition. And if there's anywhere to put a tall wall, it would be against 636 as opposed to the historic side. So that sort of biased everything over to that side. So.
I've also heard from downtown residents similar questions that Board Member Wimmer mentioned. The question I would get, probably I've gotten about a few residents downtown saying, how could the city allow the project at 636 to occur? They said, how can that happen? I mean, it's feedback I've been hearing on the street.
Yeah.
So,
and the feedback I heard here today was some people love it, some people don't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments before we conclude? Okay. All right. Ken, thank you so much for your explanation of the project, and board, thank you so much for your comments. Okay, that concludes this project. Yes. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Are the board members open for maybe a 10-minute recess? We've been sitting for a while. Okay. Okay. We'll break for about 10 minutes. Come back. Okay. Thank you.
tap dancing. Talk about, future meeting dates. Take a little pause before jumping in. I can give you an idea of what's coming in future meetings.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay, so we're resuming. So just coming back, before we get to our next item, I'd like to say we are looking towards the summer and having a few meetings. Want to know your schedules, whether you are in town or not in town. A couple of dates we're focusing on is June 22nd. We have two items. The Junior Museum and Zoo has their formal application on file now. Mm-hmm. And we have also the Stanford General Use Permit is going to be having an environmental impact report. And so leading up to that, there's some studies that are being done. And so we have Stanford coming forward, and a member of our staff is doing a staff report about that. So that's a target date, June 22nd. So two items for that date. And then looking towards July, we're going to be talking about context statement or framework for the Stanford Research Park. So looking towards one of those two dates in July. I believe it's the 13th and 27th of July are, the two possibilities there. So if you could take a look at your calendar, I'll have Robin send out and, get specifics on that as far as who's available, do we have quorums, and that sort of thing. And I bring this up because there's a possibility that our last item today is a good candidate to postpone given the hour. And we can look at one of those dates, either date certain. I would want you to make a motion on that.
Can we deal with that? Can we deal with that now?
I think you could.
I mean, we have all but Michael.
It's a check-in right now. I think it's a check-in.
Yeah, so I would like to propose that we postpone the Mills Act discussion until a date uncertain, and then, Amy, if you could have do a poll.
Right.
We could do it, I guess you said June 8th, or I'm less enthusiastic about doing it on the 22nd if we have two significant projects that are going to come before the board, because that puts it into a 3-hour meeting, and it's difficult to have a conversation at the end of that much material. So my proposal would be to do this on June 8th.
Okay. If you'd like to suggest a date certain, you can do that.
Right. So that would be my suggestion. Does that have to be a motion?
Yeah, I would say so.
Then I'd like to move that we postpone the Mills Act discussion until June 8th, or a convenient time for board members after that. That's the next scheduled meeting.
It is scheduled. We have not advertised that meeting. The ad, I guess, would have been due if we had a new project to advertise, but this is not new. So it would be a continuation of this item.
Well, if it works, if the mechanism is available to us to advertise, then that would be my motion.
Okay. I'll second that. Okay.
Discussion?
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you.
Can we add Michael's vote when he comes back? Is that acceptable?
Sure. I don't think it's necessary to just continue it. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That brings us to agenda item number 5 today, and that is 303 Parkside Drive, Green Meadow Community Center Project. 303 Parkside Drive, Historic Resources Board formal review of an update of the pool and deck and the construction of approximately 1,800 square feet community room to be located between the pool and park on the existing Green Meadow community site within the Green Meadow National Historic District. The project includes a conditional use permit request, environmental assessment exempt from CEQA. And shall staff have a report for us?
Yes, so the last time you saw this was back in December of last year, and we had a report at that point from our historic consultant, John Rush of Page and Turnbull. He has since reviewed the revised plans and provided a report. I believe it's on your in your packet. I'll tell you what page number in a moment. And let's see. I'll just tell you now because I think I'm finding it. Let's see. The memorandum from is page 228. So that came just last week, May 17th. The applicant had provided a response to the feedback from the HRB study session. That's packet page 224. And so we have looked at the project with respect to the Secretary of Interior standards. It's interesting because the landscaping, the Tommy Church designed landscaping of the park became a topic. It's very fascinating to me, having passed studies. And so we've done our table of analysis for Secretary of Interior standards compliance. I know the applicant has a presentation, and then staff, again, we're here with Graham, and if Graham can let you know, I believe this is going to the ARB. It doesn't have a date.
No, given the size of the project, I mean, it's 1,900 square feet. Technically, it can be handled at the staff level unless a hearing is requested. So at this point, it's a conditional use permit as well as an AR, both of which are staff level reviews. Unless there are hearings.
Yes, I forgot. That's how. So this is the public hearing for this item, for this project, as a formal hearing. And so we look for the HRB's input. The staff would be making the AR findings on behalf of the board, given the minor project. So we look towards the same compatibility kind of findings as far as the architectural review, and then the Secretary of Interior standards, which have been looked at. So we have a presentation, and then we'll seek your feedback.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Sherry Liscarton. So I'm a neighbor who lives in Green Meadow, representing the neighborhood, and this is Joe Mendoza, and he's an architect with the Kobza firm. I think most of you were here for the study session, which was really useful. Michael, I don't think you were, so if there are context questions, just ask, and I can help address them. So we'll go. Do I have a clicker? Do I move this? Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so and this also. Okay. I'll go over a little bit of context. So Green Meadow is an Eichler neighborhood in Palo Alto. Part of that is a shared about 3-acre lot, and there's some buildings there, which we use we rent some of that out to a school. We use some of it as locker rooms and stuff. There's a pool and there's a park. So the community got together and for the past 3 years has discussed that we need to update the pool, which is very well used, and also build a clubhouse, which doesn't exist right now, to act as a community center for the neighborhood, more year-round activities. A key goal of ours is to attract new demographics, not just families with young kids, but also older people, people without kids, singles, et cetera, who live in the neighborhood, and we want everybody to be using this shared facility. So lots of discussion around this. The neighborhood is extremely, extremely supportive. We just met a few weeks ago. So the neighborhood is very aware of this. The plans have been circulated. We have lots of meetings about it. And the cost is high. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but the cost of building in Palo Alto is insane. And so we had to raise, it's costing more than we thought. We had to go back to the community and say, are you still supportive? It's going to cost us much. And they all said yes. So lots of enthusiasm. We're hoping to start constructing the day after Labor Day. So that's just some context on this. I was told by Graham to focus mostly on the feedback that you gave us. So I'm not going to go over, it's not an overview of the project, but here's what we heard from you guys, and here's our response to that. So So the feedback that we heard from you, and also from Jonathan Rosh, who's not here, so there's a lot of feedback on the fenestration to make it more regular, more compatible with Eichlers, and a lot of you guys were like, let's get some more light into this building, so we did that. We're much happier with the windows the way that they are now. We'll show that. Some of the 10 points that we have to adhere to that you emphasized were the new building needs to be differentiated from the original and also subordinate to the original. And so we have some more feedback on that, like how is it differentiated and is it subordinate enough? There were some concerns that because the new building is higher, it may not be subordinate. And then the refuse enclosure, there's no good place for it. We looked at a bunch of places, we'll go over that, but it's big and it's ugly and it's, whatever. So we'll go over that a little bit. There were also some more minor points on, siding should be horizontal, vertical, the tilt of the roof, and also, what is that last thing? Oh, the overhang on the bathroom wing. So we'll go over those as well. But we want to hit the 4 main points as much as we can. Please interrupt me if you have any questions. I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so on fenestration, so we redid the windows a lot. We added clerestory windows. We added transoms over the doors. We added side lights. We added skylights in the hallway, in the shower. So there's a lot more light now. This shows the elevations now, the main elevations. I didn't make room for the side elevations, but they're very much redone and in keeping with today's Eichler and historic Eichler patterns, not identical, but in keeping with that. Next, on differentiation. So one thing we want to emphasize is the original buildings that are on this property are all entirely CMU. So they're off-white, they're CMU, there's not a piece of wood in them really on the buildings. And so the new building is all wood, it's brown wood. So it's very, very different in materials from the existing, but it's compatible in that some of the newer fencing that was added is also brown wood, so it actually fits in really nicely, and also with the park. You can see some of the other differences here. The perimeter is going to be a near black metal, the gates that kind of separate the clubhouse from the pool. So it's compatible, but it's not identical because all of the metal on the existing buildings is like an avocado green kind of thing. So it fits in, but it is very easy to distinguish. Subordination is a difficult one. So the obvious thing is that this clubhouse has no street presence, basically. It doesn't have an address. You can't see it from a street. You can sort of see it from Green Meadow Way across the park, but it's small and it's back there. So in that sense, it's very subordinate because the Parkside Drive, you see all the main buildings. It's the main entrance. You can't even see this from the main entrance. But there was some discussion about whether we wanted to sink the building. So the height of most of this building is 9 feet, the same as the height of the original buildings. But because the park is 30 inches taller, give or take a few inches, the building appears 30 inches taller. So the overall height is the same, but the elevation is higher, or something like that. We considered sinking the building. We rejected it very strongly, very quickly, for a couple of reasons. One is that a key goal of ours is to integrate the park with the pool and to be able to expand the use of the clubhouse out into the park. And when that is sunk, it makes it much more difficult to do so. So for example, we have these dining patios, and we can extend the dining patio out into the basketball court, for example, if they're all at an even level. Another thing is that we would have to have a lot of railings around because of the sunkenness, and that seemed to interfere with kids' ability to bike in and rollerblade, and this is what they do in that park. It's a great sort of kidney bean shape, and they just go around and around and around, and it would just get in the way of that. In addition, the views, we want to have these nice views from the clubhouse, and if it's sunk, you don't get that. You see a wall, and then the landscape around the clubhouse is really nice. We're actually investing a decent amount of money in that, and it enhances the park, and if you sink the clubhouse, you sink the landscaping along with it, and you just don't get that. So I think for a lot of reasons, we really don't want to sink the clubhouse. We think that the building is subordinate enough to the existing buildings because of its placement, basically, and a lack of street presence. The refuse enclosure. So this was an interesting one. A lot of constraints on where to put the refuse enclosure. So obviously it has to be near a street or a parking lot so the trash truck can get in. It needs to be nearest where most of the trash is generated. We have a bunch of easements on the property also, which we discovered along the way, which we can't put it on top of an easement. We want the neighbors to be comfortable with it. And then what was this other thing? This was something that you guys mentioned, like if you don't want the refuse enclosure to be in the way of the view of the historic buildings, which we agree. All of these, it's hard to get them all answered yes, so I'm going to show a bit about that. We did focus on the parking lots. This site doesn't have much in the way of street presence on other streets. There's a little bit on Green Meadow Way, but it's a big park there, so we weren't comfortable putting a refuse enclosure right at the park side. And similar on the other side, on the creek side entrance, there's a nice like esplanade. There's some benches and a whole bunch of plum trees and some olive trees, and it's a nice area, and sticking a big trash enclosure there would be really a shame. So we made a map, and it's a little bit hard to see. I don't know if you guys have printouts, but maybe Graham, you can send them electronic copies of this so you can zoom in. But we considered a bunch of places, and we picked A because the pros were most outweighed by the cons. The biggest con of putting it in A, so A is kind of in the back of the parking lot. This is pretty much where the dumpsters are today. The neighbor is fine with there being a trash enclosure there. It doesn't block much in the way of circulation or anything like that. The only thing is that it blocks part of the view. Now, the view, fortunately there, it's not of the buildings. It's just of a part of the wall. But, that's everything else is either on an easement or it's toward the front. It's toward the front of Parkside, which means that it's even bigger, kind of blocks more of the view. There was a nice place in the back corner, but we'd have to actually remove a part of the historic wall around a building that we're not touching right now. So we thought that would be even more invasive putting it there, although at the end of the day, we could probably hide it better. And there's another place on the other side, but it's too far from where the trash is actually generated, plus it's near a new neighbor, and that would raise some concerns. So nothing perfect, but we do think this is the best fit. Okay, some other feedback that we heard was vertical versus horizontal siding. There was a point made that the property has a very horizontal sense to it, and that's true. All the buildings are kind of low and flat, and so maybe we would want horizontal siding to emphasize that. But because of the windows, and the windows are so vertical, the horizontal siding we felt would be very broken up. We also like the vertical for a few reasons. One is, so remember it's dark brown. It kind of echoes the trees, like it fits in nicely with the park to have vertical siding. And then the other one is the fencing that's around that it kind of echoes also has vertical strips in it. So because of the trees and the fencing and because of the fenestration interrupting the horizontal siding, we think that vertical is a better fit. The next question was, oh yeah, the roof. Oh yeah, so this is an interesting point that you guys raised. You were talking about the character of the great room, and should the roof of that great room be, so right now most of the building is 9 feet and the great room is 12 feet. It's like a little pop-up horizontal. You could also angle the great room like that. And that was actually one of the drawings that Cobza initially provided. And this would be higher. This would be like 14 feet instead of 12 feet. And this would be a little bit lower, 11 feet. And we ran the two options by the neighbors, and the neighbors preferred the horizontal. It's a little bit lower. It's a little bit more the horizontal sense. So that's that. Prefer to stick with that if that's possible. The overhang on the bathroom wing, I actually think we should add it now. We had omitted it to give a little bit more sky because it's kind of a narrow passage on that side of the building. And some of the Green Meadow houses don't have overhangs, but they omit them on all 3 sides of the box, not just on one side. So I think that's an oversight, and I actually think we're going to add the overhang on the bathroom wing back. I don't know if you remember all of this, but anyway, assuming you remember it, what I just said makes sense. Okay, so I think that's the end of the presentation, and we're open to questions.
Okay, great. Sherry, thank you so much. Yes, Roger, you
Yes,
can tell us about your swim.
What's that?
I'm sure, I bet we're going to hear a good story from you.
Yeah, it is. I have to disclose that 30, 40 years ago, I spent a lot of time at this park with our two kids, and it's just a great place, and I'm glad to see it getting fixed up. But what else would you like me to say? You want something else? I don't know. Actually, former two-time mayor Mike Cobb lives about 3 houses away on one of the streets that dead ends into the parkway. So.
Okay, I'll start with questions for staff and applicant, open up to the public, then bring it back to the board. Go ahead.
So really quick question. I noticed that there are passive venting on the bathrooms. Are those new? Is that a new addition to the project, or were they there the last time we saw this?
I think they may.
Use the light.
I'm not sure, but
We have to have our comments recorded.
You can go use the mic.
Okay. They may, to be honest, I'm not sure, because they weren't there originally, and then we put them in there at some point, and it may have been after, but I don't remember.
So I found them, it's the only thing I saw in this set of plans that I thought was just startlingly non-compliant or incompatible. I know that that's a very standard kind of vent for a 60s building, and I'm not really being critical of it, but might I suggest you consider using solar-powered roof fans, which have a low profile, they cost nothing, they probably have a 20-year lifespan, they work whenever the sun comes out until the sun goes down, so they're constantly pulling air out, they have no noise. They're about the last time I put them in, they were about $350 a piece, but it's a one-time expense for the life of your roof, by the time you're replacing your roof. And it's really the profile that I'm concerned about. And frequently what I see on older buildings with these, I don't know what you call those vents, is that people go up there with garbage bags and cover them because they leak in the winter.
Oh.
So
yeah, that's.
I don't think that would be a very attractive addition to what I think is a very attractive project. So consider that. That's a minor issue.
That's great feedback.
Yeah, that is good feedback. Yes, that is.
We'll definitely look at that.
Other questions for staff or applicant? Okay, seeing none. Okay, I'd like to open up.
Do we get free passes for swim and when it's done?
Yeah, just buy a house. Maybe they're not free even for homeowners.
Okay, I'd like to open up members of the public, and they speak to us on any for this project. I see no members of the public. We'll bring it back to the board for comments. Board Member Bunenberg.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the horizontal siding versus the vertical. And interestingly enough, my next door neighbor has started a project on his garage, and he thought he would be using the horizontal siding, but he discovered that by the time he cut out for windows, it would make a kind of ugly pattern, and went to the vertical, and it really looks very nice, and it matches with the openings that need to happen. So, and in fact, I think I pushed for the horizontal, but now have seen a sample that it works better the other way. Otherwise, you know, I feel like it's quite a nice project and very commendable that the neighborhood has come together to to do this. It's a growing need for neighborhoods to have a place to get together. So,
Board Member Wimmer.
Yes, so I think I was the one who commented about the overhang last time. And that's the first thing I noticed when I saw this again. I was like, where's that overhang? Because I just feel like without it, it just looks like it's missing. So
You're right, we're going to change.
I vote for spending the extra money to. And I agree with Board Member Bauer about those vents. That's going to be an eyesore if you have those big crown vents. I think that's. And then on your color palette, it looks like you're painting all of the fascia boards ink black. Is that too harsh?
It's a soft black, actually. So it's not pure black. It's like a grayish black.
Okay. Just as long as it doesn't look, because I don't know if that black trim on iClers, is that common? I think it's, I don't know. I would just take a second look at that. I think black might be hard. Black is very popular now with windows. Are the window trims going to be black as well, or what are the window trims?
Yeah, so the window trims and the fascia are going to be near black, as well as the metal fence.
Okay.
The metal fence, yeah.
Well, that sounds like you've got a palette going there. And then I just, on that north elevation, which is the one that's facing the basketball courts, I think, number 2 on page A3. Mm-hmm. You've got a sliding door and then a swing door. I mean, I'm not a fan of the swing door. You have a swing door facing the pool, and I think I asked that last time. There was a special reason why you had that door.
Egress.
Egress, exiting requirements. You have to have a swing door. Sliding doors.
So the swing door.
Unless it's an electronic sliding door, you need to push out in the direction.
You have egress. So the swing door coming from the pool side, that's in swinging, so that's why you have to have one out swinging? Yeah, because those are in swinging.
Can you speak into your microphone?
Sorry. Yes, it's for code requirements for egress.
Okay.
You need to swing.
So I would at least put the lintel on top of that door window system like you have on the other.
Oh, yeah.
You have a lintel system, I think, above all the doors in the community room.
Yes.
It looks like it would be nice to see that there.
Well, here it's a transom, so this is consistent with this and this. So we actually looked at that, and it's not there.
We need to have your voice recorded.
Just a comment. You can take a look at that.
We'll take a look at it, but the other solid doors all have a transom and a side light, so this is echoing that same thing. The sliding doors have that fascia board above, but the swinging doors have a transom and a side light. So this was on purpose this way.
I just think it looks like it's missing because it's the same dimension. Even that it's a swing door instead of a sliding door, it's the fact that it's the same dimension, the same composition. It just seems like you should copy that detail. But just minor, my opinion.
These are also higher. Yeah, we'll look at that.
And then it looks like you have a snack bar with a double hung window. So I think you need to look at when you lift the lower sash of that double hung, like if someone who's 6 feet tall, who's serving coffee, is going to be looking into the window. I don't know if you have a different window solution there, something to think about. I mean, just for successful use of the building, that window looks like it needs just a little.
So you're saying that the bar would be in their line?
Yeah, because you're lifting the bottom sash. Like if you have someone who's 5 feet.
Check the height of that.
5 feet, they'll be looking out the window. Anyone my height, I'm going to be looking at the window.
Yeah.
I'm unfortunately tall, so that's why. And I think that was all my comments. Yeah. Otherwise, it's looking nice. Oh wait, I had one more comment. Sorry. On the site plan. I'm sorry. On the site plan, there's the French doors that are off the pool. They just look off center to the stair. You know, you have this sort of stair that goes up to the pool house. It just looks like the stairs it seems like the stairs need to be centered on that door system.
They should. We had centered it before.
Sorry, those things just centered.
I don't know what happened there.
Because it just feels like that's just like.
It should be centered. I agree.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're coming up, so it needs to be.
Let's look at it.
Sort of thought out.
Because this used to be centered right on the stairs. Remember, we had that feedback.
Yeah. It should be Senator, correct. I will center him.
Yeah, so this maybe just needs to get pushed this way.
Right, yeah. And Sherry, you mentioned the idea about should the community room be lowered 30 inches? I would say not lowering it. I like your response to that, is that from the main presentation of the property, you don't see that elevation up there. So it's not, I don't find that distracting. So, so no need, from my point of view, to lower that 30 inches.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Yeah. I also support Board Member Wimber's comment. Yeah, show the overhang on that bathroom wing. Look, it's looks like it's missing if you don't do it.
Yeah.
And also I support Board Member comment on that back elevation. To put in another fascia piece above there, because it looks, everything else is equal in terms of overall dimension. So more consistency that way, rather than showing the difference.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Other board members' comments?
I think you need to get going if you're going to open up in July.
I know. No. We're not. We're going to start construction in September, so we're hoping to get the building permit in in the next week or two.
Yes.
If I can ask, this is a formal hearing on a project that is seeking approval, and I would ask that the HRB make a motion and second and vote with clear direction towards if there's any conditions of approval that require modifications. That would be helpful.
Vice Chair Bauer.
So I wanted to, I thought we were just asking questions, but if we're doing comments, I want to compliment you on the thoroughness with which you have addressed all of the questions we had. I like all of your decisions. Every single thing you did, I think, made this project better, and it was already a good project. So thank you for looking at the garbage enclosure. That was my question. I think you did a much more thorough analysis than I have seen in a lot of projects. And I think, again, your decision was great. So congratulations. I look forward to seeing it when it's built.
Thank you.
We're looking for a motion.
So I move to approve the project as submitted with the one, with the expanded overhangs as we have discussed, and with the lintel over that one door.
And the vents.
Oh, and change your venting on the top. Just eliminate, don't eliminate the venting, but just don't use those particular ones. I think you'll find that the solar ones are really just exactly what you need. So.
We need your microphone on, please.
Could we add the findings for meeting the Secretary of Interior standards is included in the staff report?
Right, and let's see, that statement would be also that this project meets the Secretary of Interior standards for modification or additions to historic properties. Is that okay?
Second.
That's my motion, complicated and dysfunctional as it is. Is there a second?
Okay, a second.
I'll second that.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
Many seconds.
Okay, yeah, and then there was a comment by the applicant and the architect that you'll centerline the stairway with that'll happen on back there. Okay, any discussion before we vote on the motion? Okay, all in favor, signal aye. Aye. That passes unanimously from the board.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good.
Thanks for your feedback. It made it a better project. So
Oh yeah,
we really
great.
appreciate it.
Very good. We have come through all of our agenda items. We expect the next is approval of minutes. Thank you. Approval of minutes. I see we have none. Subcommittee items. None. And board member questions, comments, or announcements? Yes, board member. Vice Chair.
I'd like to make board members and the public aware of the fact that the City of Palo Alto has now added a link on our webpage to the Palo Alto Stanford Heritage webpage, which has extensive amount of information about historic properties on the Stanford campus and in Palo Alto in the general area. It's a very good research tool, and it's our history. Excuse me. So in conjunction with that, would like to make everyone aware of the fact that Palo Alto Stanford Heritage does walking tours of Palo Alto neighborhoods. And they had one recently in the Crescent Park area. On their website, again, you can find the dates of the other areas that they explore. And they're really great walks, as Martin can tell you because he's led some of them.
20 years,
Okay, I think that's our concluding issue, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
What about our next meeting? We have